What's up? How you doing? I am David Long. Thanks for joining us. Today, I am very blessed to have with me in the I Am David Long Friends and Fans group, a longtime member of the Integral community.
This is our first encounter with each other. I've known of you quite a while because I worked for Ken Wilber between 2003 and 2008. I was Ken Wilber's videographer.
My buddy, Jason Diggs, who is here to talk about his new book, Conflict Equals Energy.
Hey, everyone. David, I'm really excited to talk about this with you. Pre-interview, we were talking about this concept of everything is a remix. I believe we're entering an age of transparency and free information where curation is going to be so important. But yeah, I don't think there's going to be any such thing as copyright in 100 years. I think things are so mixed. Everything is a remix is a way to say it.
I was going to say, have you seen Everything is a Remix? Yeah, it's a great series.
It's a series?
Yeah, man. When you get done hanging out with me, type up Everything is a Remix. It's a video series. The first one goes through music and it shows how everything's a remix, and then it goes through film, and then it goes through technology. And it talks about how these idea bubbles that we think we have these intellectual properties around certain ideas, and really everything's a remix. So it's kind of not true in the first place. And it talks about also how even having intellectual property creates these trolls who buy up things and then sue other people, and it becomes like this whole industry. But the original point around copyrights was to give the person who invented the thing some time to make their money back on the investment before all the knockoffs come, and then make your thing for cheaper. It's a time bubble in order to let you recoup some of your profit before those things go into the public domain. But it seems like we've lost that as a strategy, and it's taken on this life of its own. But yeah, it's a great little set of YouTube documentaries and whatnot.
Remix. To combine or edit existing materials to produce something new. The term remix originally applied to music. It rose to prominence late last century during the heyday of hip-hop, the first popular music form to incorporate sampling from existing recordings. This is evolution. Copy, transform, and combine. And culture evolves in a similar way, but the elements aren't genes, they're memes. Ideas, behaviors, skills. Memes are copied, transformed, and combined. And the dominant ideas of our time are the memes that spread the most. This is social evolution. Copy, transform, and combine. It's who we are, it's how we live, and of course, it's how we create. Our new ideas evolve from the old ones.
Pre-interview, we were talking about this concept of everything is a remix. And I have taken everything I've learned from both the integral world and the authentic relating and circling world and remixed it with lots of things around transpersonal psychology, Taoism, Jungian psychology, and made a very, very practical relationship book. It has 30 tools, and I'm mega proud of it. It's really dense and really practical for people to transform their relationships using authentic relating. So,
very cool. I'm really excited to dig into this topic with you more. First, though, before we get too into it, I would like to hear a little bit more about your history with the integral community and a little bit about your journey. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, there was actually a season in my life in 2003, and I call it my leap of faith. So I was hanging out on Integral Naked, which was Ken Wilber's website back then, integralnaked.org, and I was on the forums and meeting people just through posting, which we did back then, and I was meeting people through AOL Instant Messenger, and these were my internet friends, and I had never talked to any of them on the phone. We were just into the same concepts and ideas, and one of them, his name is Paul Salomon, was moving to Boulder. He's like, I visited Boulder a couple months ago. I want to move there. There's this integral community starting. And I said to him on AOL Instant Messenger, if you ask me to move to Boulder with you, I will. Because at that time I was thinking about moving to Austin, Texas. I wanted to get off the East Coast. I'm from upstate New York. And I rented an apartment over the internet and went to Boulder with never having ever been to Colorado. I didn't know a single person. Paul and I met on the way. Like I picked him up on the way and we rented an apartment together. And I was employee number 5 for Integral Institute. I was hired about 3 or 4 months after I arrived in Colorado, and was producing content for them for about 5 years as a video producer. And so I got to basically get a PhD in transpersonal psychology, like along the way, as I was producing hundreds of hours of content, and spent many years as an independent video producer after I left the Integral Institute, but I was still working with people in that community. And then about 7 years ago, I encountered circling and authentic relating. And that's when I really began to kind of switch my career from a technical creative one to one of being a teacher and now an author.
Awesome, man. That was a very succinct and detailed explanation. Very good. You've been doing this, huh? You've been doing a lot of interviews. You got this thing down to a science.
I have. It took me a year to write the book. And this was after like 5 years of leading these authentic relating and circling events, where there'd be 20 or 30 people in the room and I would be leading exercises and teaching, and stuff was kind of tumbling out of my mouth. And once in a while it was really cool. And so I'd write it down. And so after 5 years of teaching, I was like, okay, I have to write a book. I have to put all of this stuff in one place. The process of self-publishing and going through the editing process and hiring editors and really refining the material was absolutely fulfilling and absolutely grueling. It kind of sharpened my mind to do that, because I started with this thing that was like 70,000 words and now it's like 50,000 words. And we literally honed it and refined it again and again. And so since I released the book 2 months ago, I've just been out there doing 3 to 5 interviews a week.
Nice, man. How has that been? Have most of the people who have been interviewing you read your book beforehand, and have they given you back both good feedback and also maybe some bits of criticism or upgrades or things that you would want to address or something like that? I'm wondering about that.
Well, I mostly find that people are just really excited about this topic. And I don't know if it's just the zeitgeist of the time that we're in. It's like I literally published this book a week after the Black Lives Matter movement just exploded in the US. And it's called Conflict Equals Energy. So interesting timing on that. But for a while, I was a teacher and I have a company that does authentic relating trainings. I would talk to people and I would say, oh, by the way, second half of the second day of the course, we teach you how to handle conflict and tension in your relationships. And people would be like, oh, really? I need that. And like literally there was like this kind of resonance with that topic, just talking to people about the work that I do, starting about 5 years ago. And I was like, what is this? And I just began to form this thesis in my mind of like, oh, wow, we don't actually have emotional education. We don't have relationship education. And if we could teach people how to manage their emotions in the face of conflict and tension, which is inevitable. Like if you have any type of intimacy, like the intimacy that happens between two people who are doing a project together or student teacher, eventually you're going to rub up against each other. And that's actually the universe telling us there's a place to grow.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And I totally agree with you that developing good habits and patterns about being open to conflict or to critical voices or to just tension around a topic, like can definitely be a vehicle for personal growth. And I mean, I think a lot of people even get into relationships as a spiritual practice in general, just because they see that it's such a good opportunity for us to be able to be exposed through the gaze of another person. And if we're really open to that, if we're really trying to work on ourselves, if we really care about being in line with what's good and true, then there's upgrades that are going to come through. So that's definitely one of the major things that when I started reading your book, this is what it sounds like. It's like, look, I got into this stuff and it has changed me. It has upgraded me for the better. I've seen it upgrade a bunch of other people for the better. This is a tool for personal upgrades through being open with conflict, mostly even within yourself. It seems like owning your stuff and being willing to look at it is what a lot of it is. Which is why I've asked if your book has created any conflict or tension in your life, and if there has been some energy around this, and if you've gotten any upgrades on the other side of it.
Absolutely. And it was so strange when I started writing this book, because my life was actually a shit show for for a year. It seemed like every 2 months there would be like this huge conflict, like with housemates or business partners or relationships. And I was like, what is going on? It's like, oh, I'm actually writing about this topic, so the universe is testing me. And it's almost like I'm in this masterclass. I started to realize that we often fail. We often just fail and become reactive. We hurt people with our reactivity, or we damage our relationships by being controlling or whatever it is. And if we have the tools and skills and the communication techniques to do that less, that's a big step forward. It's not like we're going to be perfect in this area. I mean, humans in general, our level of resourcefulness and our level of access to higher values like compassion and perspective taking and all of that decreases when we're triggered. But if we can just keep some of that online, and that's what a lot of the tools and techniques in the book are about. How do we keep online our, what I call dignity and humility, but also like our compassion, our perspective taking, and all of these things in the face of conflict?
Yeah, I really like the wording of dignity and humility, because there's this tendency we have to either fall into false humility or false pride, right? And we want to have both a healthy version of humility and a healthy version of pride. But pride is one of those words that kind of has a negative connotation. So maybe dignity is a better word for it. I guess this is where I would maybe want to ask you what the audience for this book is, because at first when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about it as if it was circling. But now that I'm thinking about it more, I'm saying, okay, so this is a synthesis of tools that you've gotten on the back end of having all these circling practices and stuff like that. This is more like the lessons as the outcome kind of thing.
Yeah, circling and authentic relating are kind of cousins. I taught circling for years at the Integral Center with Robert McNaughton and that whole crew. And a lot of the lessons and tools in the book are gleaned from the circling world. But authentic relating tends to be more structured exercises. Like we use a lot more sentence stems. We have what we call games or exercises that really provide a place for people to practice setting boundaries or practice asking for what they want and need. And I think authentic relating is much more like a bridge to the mainstream. And so you asked about the audience. So circling and authentic relating, if you can imagine 10,000 people around the world, mostly in Europe and the US, but also in places like Bali and Australia, it's like we're this very small niche community with about a dozen major teachers and another 200 people who are also teaching and leading it in some capacity. And so it's like this decentralized movement. There's no one person who's the face of authentic relating or invented authentic relating. It's actually a practice that has been, I credit 7 or 8 people in the beginning of the book as some of my main teachers and main influences because I wanted to synthesize the curriculum. And so it's designed for people in that audience, but I translated everything into plain language so that we can introduce it to the mainstream and introduce it to people who are outside of that bubble. And that's what my company is really trying to do is like, how do we bring authentic relating into education and into business and other places in our society?
Yeah. I'm definitely picking up that vibe. Did you know that I also had an interview with Robert McNaughton?
Oh, really?
Yeah. Friends with Robert McNaughton. I actually got to come out to the Integral Center for one of the Halloween jamborees that y'all had down there and got to perform a little bit. It was really fun. I really enjoyed my talk with Robert McNaughton. I'm really interested in the future of Integral and Integral as a cultural revolutionary movement, not just like a clubhouse. And I had him on when the Integral Community Center closed. And so we were kind of looking back over the history of the Integral Community Center and sort of the pros and cons, where we might have gone wrong, where could maybe do it better next time, and what the future might hold for some of that kind of stuff. He was talking about how circling became one of the big draws there. I remember hearing some mixed reviews around some of that kind of stuff where it seemed like it was very powerful and very helpful in a personal way for some people. And then it seemed like other people, maybe the rare person, but like I did hear from a couple people that they were potentially, had past traumas kind of like re-triggered. They felt like maybe gaslighted. Or what are your experiences, I'm curious, I guess, around the lines at which some of these things potentially go wrong, where it might be good to maybe have like a professional psychotherapist there who knows where to be like, okay, I think we need to, for example, you mentioned how these practices, they have no dogma. And you also said something like, adapt and apply these things as they suit you. And then you mentioned just a little while ago too about how there's no real authority around these things and people are just kind of out there using them. Like on one hand, I feel like that's great. And we all obviously are navigating the world together, right? And there's not like always a psychotherapist there to come in and be like, hold on, we have to deal with real world trauma and stuff like this. But I guess as a leader trying to do this in public as a practice, how do you deal with that? Like, are there places where you draw the line and how does that work?
Yeah, I think the authentic relating community is very unique in that way, in the sense that, when you have a modality that's invented by a psychologist, and there's been many different modalities, like for instance, focusing was created by a psychologist and then they train focusing teachers. And we could probably look at dozens. It falls under the umbrella of psychology. And so the word psyche in German means soul. So it's actually a way to get into someone's soul. That's what psychology is. The healing relationship that happens between a psychotherapist and patient, it's like the actual relationship that's formed, that's trustworthy and solid, that can heal relational trauma. That's how psychotherapy works primarily. We're doing this off the reservation. We're actually teaching people to form secure, healthy attachments. We're actually teaching people how to have intimacy and depth with each other and how to create that in their lives without any governing body, without any authority. Many of the prominent authentic relating teachers are millennials. Like I'm 44 and many of the teachers are around 30. So there's this whole movement. I think of authentic relating as sustainable mental health. And that's like a phrase that I started using about a year ago, because if you think about what it would take for every single person in the world to have a weekly therapy session, you start to realize that, well, the average therapists, because they're taking on a lot of emotional and psychic energy from their clients.
Oh, yeah.
Like
it's heavy.
It's heavy. It's not like you can see 40 people a week. That would be way too much. Like the average therapist, 20 a week is a huge workload.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so if the average therapist can see between 10 and 20 people per week, that means 1 in 20 people on the planet would need to be a therapist for that to be a sustainable mental health plan. So what we're doing is we're teaching people how to create secure, healthy friendships, how to get emotional needs met for being seen and heard, how to rely on each other and lean on each other in a way that's safe and effective. And yeah, there's been times where this experiment of circling and authentic relating has re-traumatized people. People who are traumatized are out there looking for healing, whether consciously or subconsciously, they're really seeking that. And so they can be drawn to these communities. And I don't think there's any way to solve it. I think the cat's out of the bag. You have people who are 24 years old leading circling with no actual training or certification.
I heard pretty recently someone say something. We're talking about personality type. I'm INFJ. We're talking about the T and F distinction. He was saying that actually both of these types are thinking types. It's just that the more T type is more analytical, and then the more F type is more ethical. So it's not that it's not thinking, it's that it's thinking with concern. When I was reading some of this stuff, I was feeling my own concerns about things come up around the circling. I'm not saying this is direct analogy or anything like that. I could imagine someone writing a book and being like, psychedelics really helped me to grow, change my life, and to be more healthy. And I got lots of great things out of doing psychedelic. And then they could make a really good case for why we should all do psychedelics. And I would potentially agree with that book in all of the things that it says. But then I'm wondering, okay, where's the chapter on do not just put this stuff in the water? We have to be responsible with this stuff. If I was in charge of things in the future, I would be like, okay, we'll allow psychedelic, but we'll have to have trained coaches and teachers, and they know what they're doing. There's like a way that you can do this stuff that's more safe. So I guess that's my concern. Is there a way to do this stuff that we can know where the lines are drawn in a way where it is more safe? And I mean, also, I think it probably matters a lot, the health and stage of the development of the leader and the health and the stage of development of the other people who are circling you. Because otherwise, I'm assuming if we're looking at the Wilber-Combs matrix, that they're always going to be translating through their own worldview. So if you had a bunch of green people who were doing, then they're basically going to be trying to indoctrinate someone into green values. And they can be like, hey, it's a problem that you think too much, or it's a problem that you have an ego. They could come in with all these green assumptions and project that onto you. And these are concerns that I would have around some of this stuff. What do you think about that?
Well, I love that you're bringing in these models. And because I worked for Ken Wilber for many years, like I was thinking in these models and seeing the world through these lenses primarily for a long time. And I've actually trained myself out of it for a certain reason, because I don't want to think of a person as green. I mean, what you're saying is true in like these broad generalizations.
Sure. I don't mean to reduce a person to a stage. I think that's unskillful, but I'm saying if a person's value center is at green and their ideas are green.
Yes. Yeah. As a teacher and facilitator, I have a responsibility. I have a moral imperative to help as much as I can and to do the least amount of harm that I can. In a sense, the whole do no harm. I am a type of physician because I'm offering people the ability to go into their hearts, into their souls, into their subconscious mind. Like we often talk about making the implicit explicit in authentic relating and, making the unconscious conscious. Like that's what a lot of the work is about. And because I'm doing that, I have a responsibility. And there have been some communities that were very experimental, and they were like, let's just go in there as deep as we can. We're going to play with this kind of archetypal psychology and get into these really intense circling processes. I left that behind. I had my time playing in those realms, and it was really valuable for me to grow as a leader. But I did see people being re-traumatized. I did see people who would have such an intense experience through a course that it might take them like 1.5 years to truly integrate it. And so is that re-traumatizing, or is it just something came up that it took them that long to deal with? I don't know. It's helpful. So me and my co-founder, we do things in a much more mellow way. We do a lot more teaching. We do a lot more giving context, a lot more framing for people, just practice with the communication techniques. And then 10% of the time, we're marinating in the mystery of what it's like to be together right here, right now. So we have a dash of that circling vibe in there because it provides a lot of juice and a lot of energy. But I had a 16-year-old girl in my class with her father in Philadelphia. And they're doing the conflict transformation work at the end of the weekend. And she's crying and he's kind of being his blustery, dominant self with his teenage daughter, but he's doing it with so much more vulnerability because he's coming from care and they're getting into deeper relationship with each other. And then they're telling the story to the whole group. And so I think of it as more safe the way we're doing it, because as a facilitator, if I see something that's super juicy or super reactionary in a participant, I'm not necessarily going to go for that thing just because it's going to create the most aliveness in the room. I want to be responsible. I want to keep people on the path of this is the material that we're getting in this course. And this is the path of education of this 2-day course. My course is called The Art of Being Human.
I like that.
Each leader has to decide how to do it. Do you go for the juice? Do you go for aliveness or do you go for safety? I think everyone draws that line in a different place.
That's a tough, I would say that my tendency to approach these kinds of things is more from a philosophical meaning type place. I'm interested in the kind of stories that people tell around things, and then potentially trying to offer different stories and different ways of framing things. I think that's really powerful. I mean, this is another thing that was kind of coming up for me as I was thinking about how this seems to be, in terms of those models again, it seems to be a very upper left style approach. I had a couple other friends of mine who are close, who I live with, take a look at your book with me and try to get some ideas about questions and some of this kind of stuff. And we were talking about conflict. We were having an argument about the conflict. They're like, this assumes that people in this context meet under this umbrella to potentially work through this conflict. And I'm like, yeah, well, I think the thing is that the book doesn't necessarily show you how to solve the conflict. What it shows you is how you can use the conflict to learn things about yourself. There are places where it sounds like if you work on your upper left quadrant, that'll help you solve conflicts. And it's like, well, yeah, that's true. If we can get good at doing this, then it'll potentially help make a better world, because we'll be able to deal with these. It's like, yeah, that's true, because we need a healthy upper left quadrant to be able to do that. But it does seem like that it really does all focus mostly on owning your own upper left quadrant and you doing the work, because you can't make other people do anything. You can only own your own stuff and do your own thing. But that seems to be the focus more than it's really about solving conflict, right?
Well, I think the first half of the book is focused the way you're saying.
Okay, maybe I just didn't make it far enough yet.
Yeah, the last third, especially the last 4 chapters, are all very specific tools on how we transform conflict. And I use that word very, very deliberately. We're not trying to de-escalate conflict, use the word solve. I don't think that's the best word, because there's no solving the human condition. If we're able to transform the conflict that we are currently in with our partner or with our job, the universe is just going to spit another one back at us 2 months from now for the next version of the lesson. And that's where my Taoist background really comes in. It's like, this is a way to really surf the energies of our lives and be skillful in our communication, and hopefully produce learning for me and the people I care about, and to create more connection as well. I'm in a new relationship right now, and I've been dating for 4 months. It's been amazing to go really, really deep with a partner. And when these smaller things come up, I'm addressing them almost right away. And I'm using them as a way to create a clear foundation of how we do things in our relationship. And that's what I mean by transforming conflict. It's like the fact that you're upset with me, or I'm feeling low energy and you're feeling high energy, and we're just kind of missing each other. The fact that that's happening, the most important lesson of the book, I believe, is how do we look at that as this should be happening? Because our natural inclination as human beings is, I'm in emotional pain, I'm uncomfortable, I'm frustrated, this shouldn't be happening.
Conflict is not necessarily a problem. So it's more about creating this kind of consistent vibe where we understand, okay, we don't have to freak out right now. Actually, this is a great opportunity for us to demonstrate to each other just how authentic and open and honest and loving and caring we can actually be.
And to really get to know each other.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Because knowing your things that set you off is learning how to be a good partner or a relationship for you. It's learning how to care about you particularly.
Yeah. There's this thing in psychology called the fundamental attribution error. And basically, in absence of information, I assume everyone else is like me.
Right.
So unless I know what your preferences are, I'm just going to treat you like I want to be treated. Unless I know what your value system is, I'm just going to assume you have the same set of values as I do. And the truth is that some people put compassion way higher on that priority list, and other people put integrity or honesty or transparency way higher on that value list of, what are your top 10 values? Some people, kindness and compassion show up really close to the top. For other people, autonomy and having clear boundaries, personal space or privacy show up as a really important value, right? So whenever we're in conflict, almost always, it's because our value systems are clashing, and we're expecting the person to have the same values as us. And we're expecting the person to bring the thing that we're meant to bring, the medicine that we're meant to bring to the universe and the situation. We're just expecting other people to do that. And it doesn't work like that.
Yeah. And this kind of reminds me of one of the things that is in the very beginning of your book. Actually, you didn't write this part, so I don't know. I'm going to ask you about what you think about it. I think it's the foreword to your book. The person who wrote it seems to kind of draw what to me seems almost like a false dichotomy between strategic communication and authentic communication. It almost seems they're creating an orange is bad and green is good kind of a vibe in that sort of framing. I think from this integral synthesis kind of place is that it's always both. If you're doing it right, it's always both. Because if I have my authentic thing that my roommate, he gets his drink and he goes, and he slurps his coffee. It just annoys me. That's my authentic thing. But then I want to live with him and have a good relationship with him, right? So I got to figure out some kind of strategic way to frame my concern. I feel like the strategic manipulative style gets a bad rap. And oftentimes the authentic thing can be the selfish narcissistic thing. Like, why should it be about me and what I think of all the time? Maybe I should be secondary to the greater good of the situation or whatever that is. I'm interested to hear what you think about this.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're bringing this up. So I want to share something with you and your audience that I've never shared with anyone in the whole world. I haven't even said this to anyone in my audience or my company or the Authentic Relating audience. So Arjuna, our dog, wrote the foreword, and I met him at the Integral Spiritual Experience. That was like right toward the end of when I was working for Integral Institute. So 2008, I met this guy. And then I met him again at a conference a year and a half ago in LA called Summit. And we hung out and went to a few DJs and parties together at Summit. It's like this huge party in LA with an entrepreneurial conference, and mega cool guy. I remember him leading things at the Integral Spiritual Experience that were just really profound for me. My first deep eye-gazing experience with someone where it's like the whole room starts to morph. I really have so much admiration for him. When I was in the process of finishing the book, toward the end of the editing process, I started to reach out to all the published authors I know. So I reached out to Terry Patton and Diane Hamilton and Jeff Salzman and a few other authors, and I asked them to endorse the book. And if you look in the beginning of the book, praise for this book section, it has some of my mentors and teachers. Someone like Jeff Brown is not necessarily in the Integral community, but Diane and Terry and Jeff are some of the biggest names in the Integral community. And I was like really honored that they endorsed the book. And Arjuna, he sends me his blurb and it's great. And then might have been 1 or 2 weeks later, he's like, man, this book is really good, Jason. Do you want me to write a foreword? And I was like, hell yeah. He's this prominent author, way compared to where I am in my career. And I was really, really honored. And he offered, I didn't even ask. And I asked him for something that was really short because the style of the book is really pithy. A lot of the tools in the book are 200 to 300 words long. You could literally read them in 2 minutes or less and like really think about them. You know,
it's I really appreciate that, by the way, that you kept it short, kept it brief, got to the point like that. It's inspiring to me, actually.
You know, there's a couple of chapters, the chapter on hologram, the chapter is like 1,000 words. It's like a blog article almost. You know, and so I asked her for something really short and he sends me back something 3 times the length that I asked for. And so I had to edit a bunch of stuff. And there are some things in there that are kind of like cranky green language and complaining about the media and complaining about the educational system and complaining about society. And I thought about it and I'm like, well, I don't fully agree with him. About that, but actually there's a part of me that does fully agree with him, that does resonate with that perspective, this idea that, you know, the news media, you know, maybe 40 years ago, it was a really beneficial thing for our society.
Yeah.
And it really kept things in check.
And it did a job, and now it doesn't do that job anymore.
Exactly.
It's been taken over by capitalism and corrupted.
Yeah, it's a green, cranky perspective, but I kind of agree with it.
But it's true, yeah.
And so the framing that he had around strategic versus honest communication was such a strong piece of writing, and I was able to edit it down to 800 words and get it into the length that I wanted with his permission, and that I definitely wanted to keep it. And then there was a few things in there that anyone who's in the Integral community is going to see this glaringly. It's just ironic because he is an Integral teacher. He was the first Integral spiritual experience, and I assume he knows Ken's work very well.
Yeah. Are you familiar with Barrett Brown?
Oh yeah. Barrett was one of the teachers of the Integral Ecology workshop that we did in like 2005.
That's a great one. I love that video where he talks about communicating about environmentalism to every stage of development. Once he gets to the end, he talks about language as almost like an integral buckshot where you can use different words to resonate with different people at different levels. I've kind of trained myself over the years to hear these words. Even as I'm reading your book, I'm like, there's something for blue, there's something for orange, there's a bit of green right there, you know, here's an integral distinction. I'm seeing it in there.
Integral is encoded in the book. It's interesting. I don't talk about any of the models, but Barrett Brown and Bert Parley and Brett Thomas, what you're talking about, Brett Thomas used to call it simulcasting. And you literally say one sentence that resonates with blue, one sentence that resonates with orange, one sentence that resonates with green. And you do that with every concept. And so you're actually talking cross meme. I found myself doing that at certain places in the writing. These guys are all my teachers and mentors, you know, and so I was attempting to create an integral relationship book without talking about
Yeah. I'm wondering this too, as I'm reading it, I'm like, is this translation? He's speaking to his orange and green and blue audience and resonating with all of them? Or is this his view? And I'm going to have to ask him about this and see what he says. Yeah. Now that we're talking about it, I see that. I see the simulcasting. Yeah, that's what's up. Okay. So here's something I was thinking about in relation to this as being an upper left tool for getting yourself kind of ported, being able to see your own things. I think there was one point at which, I think it was like in one of the early chapters, I did kind of feel like maybe again there was like a green sort of allergy to orange here, where you're talking about technology and stuff like that, right? You're like, we don't need the next iPhone update. What we need is these upper left quadrant updates. As I'm reading this is kind of triggering my inner orange. And I'm like, what do you mean we don't need that new update? No, I want both. I want that new update in this quadrant, and I definitely think that we're way behind in terms of having systems for these upper left quadrants.
Yeah, my view on that is influenced by Guy Sangstock, who's one of the circling teachers. I'm just friends and colleagues with him. I haven't studied with him in depth. I only did a couple evening classes with him. But he said this thing to me in my podcast interview with him, where he's like, I wonder if we need training in communication and relationship and embodiment because of technology. And I thought that was really interesting. And so I just pictured, I'll just tell you everything that's behind this one tiny sentence in the book. I pictured myself 150 years ago being a single man and wanting to go on a date. What would I have to do? I would literally have to knock on the girl's door and present myself to her father and say, may I take your daughter to the dance? And then I would have to be in this social dance, ballroom dancing, or whatever it was in that particular culture, among all of our peers. She had social permission to dance with other men during it, and we would do these line dances. We're literally moving in 360 degrees, and we're communicating in these like interesting kind of direct, proper ways to present ourselves. And I'm like, wow, we don't do that anymore. We have online dating. Our culture has diversified so much and separated so much, where if I was dating a woman, I probably wouldn't meet her family somewhere between 3 months and 3 years after I started dating her.
And now you don't have to do the approach anymore. And all that stuff is kind of made way easier. Even actually, I did a podcast about the pickup community, a friend of mine who was more into that kind of stuff. A lot of people associate it with sleazy guys trying to get laid, but actually a lot of the people who are in those communities are good guys who want a real relationship. And they authentically want to be able to get a girlfriend or whatever. And yeah, we had talked about how Tinder and some of these technologies have kind of made the pickup stuff obsolete because you don't have to approach anymore, which is some of the hardest stuff. But then what I've noticed is that people are a lot more likely now to just ghost each other. When conflict comes or when there's uncomfortable communication that needs to be done, instead of having the guts to face the other person and do the right thing of communicating to them how they actually feel, they just ghost the other person and sort of leave them to like, well, obviously they didn't like me. And it's like, yeah. So in that regard, I definitely think you're right that we are, especially younger generations who are growing up with this stuff, that they're missing out on a lot of the formal communication stuff that we have established over long time.
Yeah, in the introduction to the book, when I'm kind of setting up the thesis, I talk about this 75 years study from Harvard that tracked wellness, health, and personal fulfillment of thousands of men over the course of 75 years. And they found what's like a really common sense conclusion, which is that the ability to come to the end of your life and have very few regrets, and the ability to even live a long time and with a lot of wellness, depends almost entirely on having long-term friendships and strong relationships.
Yeah. Humans are social animals. We need each other. We need each other.
Exactly. And so authentic relating is really just, and this is a theory, this is a thesis, I think we have a lot of evidence for it. Authentic relating is kind of coming in and filling this gap in education because of the influence of technology. That's the theory. It's because of technology, because everything has diversified and modernized so much, we actually need to train ourselves in how to create long-term relationship. I have a friendship and we've been in each other's lives for 15 years. And we started to get really, really close about 1.5 years ago. And we had been close. We were in a men's group for a while. We were kind of in and out of each other's lives in different contexts. At some point we said to each other, I was like, whoa, this is actually a really important relationship. Like, I don't have many people in my life that I've known that I'm sure that I want in my life 15 years from now. He's a psychologist, and through his understanding of secure attachment and my understanding of authentic relating, we just started to teach each other, and we started to have this really deep friendship. And for many years, I was like a very social creature, and I loved meeting new people. And now I'm just in a different phase where I'm like, okay, who are 5 closest people, and how can I really prioritize those relationships?
Yeah, that's kind of how I am too. I've always had like 1 or 2 really close friends. In my family too, we're very honest, too honest, if anything. One of my close friends, his family is not like this. He has kind of always felt on the outside, like a bit of a black sheep. I think he also has a kind of a hard time relating to people and even forming attachments and stuff like that. But in our friendship, it's definitely this next level thing, because I'm the kind of person who gives you real feedback. And I guess this is one of the things that I have a major issue with around a lot of the postmodern spaces, is it seems like one of their problems is that they try to shut down engagement. Don't rock the boat. maybe the good thing about some of these circling practices and authentic relating and stuff like that is because it's framed in a way where everyone owns their own truth, and it like invites you to look at yourself in kind of a way, it seems less judgy, and we're all agreeing to be here in the container where we're going to be working on ourselves. So maybe it's like more okay in that context that judgments would come up and stuff. Like, I'm curious too about this, the polarity idea. I feel like this is the kind of thing that makes a lot of sense, especially if you're talking to a first-tier thinker, because most people are very stuck in their one view of things. Most people don't actually have a meta-systemic perspective. Most people haven't actually deconstructed their worldview and looked at other people's worldview. And so this makes sense as a tool for those kinds of people to learn to think outside of their box. But I don't hear like a developmental distinction where there's a difference between prejudging and then judging based on knowing that this is some messed up stuff that you're doing here, and this is where I draw the line, and it's actually not cool that you're doing this. Like, I mean, there was at one point, I think you used the word love and radical acceptance. To me, this felt like a thing that would be very vibing with Green, right? It's that agape and all that, the motherly love. And so I'm wondering, in these kinds of spaces, it does seem there's judgment. It does seem like there's criticism. How do you hold both this love and acceptance and also bring these criticisms and judgments? And where do you know where the line between my judgments, what's true about you ends? Like, is it on that person to decide for themselves whether it's true? There are judgments being made in these spaces. And like, we can't act like that's not true, because it's definitely happening. How does that work?
Well, I think authentic relating is a secular awareness practice. So it's about relationship as a path of growth, and it's about increasing our social and emotional awareness and social and emotional intelligence through the practices. So we're a community of practitioners, and friendship and intimate relationship, it's like all of these skills are applicable to that area. But as practitioners of authentic relating, we can really relate in the same way, like if someone was a Zen practitioner and they met another Zen practitioner and they strike up a conversation about Zen. So authentic relating is really a body of knowledge that has grown into a modality that is now a practice community. I think what you're pointing to is really, really important. Communication can be used to control or try to assert my reality onto someone else, or communication can be used to relate. In other words, how is your reality different than my reality? Where's there overlap? Where are places we agree or don't agree? That's called shared reality. So in authentic relating, we are attempting to dialogue and find shared reality, because the building of shared reality is actually really important for communities and society. We're giving people all the tools and skills to do this, but there's no way to prevent people from trying to control or manipulate or dominate each other emotionally through communication. I mean, that's just human nature. It happens a lot. If we're doing that with the people that are around us, the goal of authentic relating is to wake up to those patterns, do them less.
Right. And in terms of solving real world conflict, though, if they're around real world problems, we kind of do have to try to, if I'm living with my roommate and he's slurping his coffee all the time and it's driving me crazy, am I a jerk for trying to control his reality? Or is this a common thing where it was going to drive any person crazy and it's actually helpful to me to be critical of it? Because if he gets a girlfriend in the future, she's going to kill him for this kind of stuff or whatever. You know what I mean? Like,
totally. The reason I started with polarity, chapter 1 is on polarity, chapter 2 is on embodiment. The reason I started with these two, and a lot of the other authentic relating and circling teachers don't necessarily talk about these two things. The rest of the book is more like my synthesis of the curriculum, but I wanted to start with them because in a sense, it's my shorthand for integral consciousness, right? So you have the value of authenticity and you have the value of belonging, right? And these two values live in a polarity and they're seemingly in contradiction in a particular situation. But that's actually the way the universe works. When we stretch to encompass both sides of the polarity, that's why I say authentic relating is telling the truth without blowing up your relationships, right? It's everything is phrased in this polarity because that one tool helps us approach a particular situation with more options on the menu.
Right. Okay. So it's more of these things, like obviously in chapter 1 and chapter 2 are more fundamental practices to help you gain perspective kind of a thing. It's a good place to start. I've thought a bit about some kind of an integral communication method. I guess the way that I think about it is in terms of like bringing a person into your inner circle. You have these walls that are up around you. You have to kind of test the person to see if you can let them in a little bit more. And so I think the way that it starts is you try to see them, you try to know them, you try to validate with them, you find this common space. But then once you see each other, once you know that you like each other, there's this point of conflict, a challenge. I like to frame it as a positive thing, a challenge, right? And then how does the person deal with the challenge? And then through navigating that challenge, and hopefully it's probably around something that's a small thing, so you can build some goodwill around this challenge. It doesn't seem too threatening. But yeah, then if the person deals with the challenge well, they earn your respect or they lose your respect, I guess, as a person. And you're like, okay, wow, I can work with you here. If I have a tension, I can bring it to you. If I have a challenge, I can bring it to you, and you're going to process it in a way that's skillful and open and honest. And now I trust you.
Or when you don't, you're going to own it later on, right? I think this is a really undervalued skill, is like, if I really mess up in a relationship and then I don't admit that the next day, then that creates damage. But if I can be self-effacing, and anyway, keep going.
You're right. And then it's like, I guess I don't want to see that challenge as a negative thing. You don't either. That's the concept of your book. But I guess I'm concerned about this idea. On one hand, there's non-violent, like just finding common ground. And then there's imposing your reality, right? It's like, well, if we're going to get things done together, we have to come to some kind of a meeting place about what's actually true about reality.
Yeah. Nonviolent communication was the cutting edge of communication work in the 70s and 80s, and it went around the world. And it's also defining something as what it's not. It's actually not a great name, and it's very, very green. Some of what I'm doing is taking their term, owning your experience, updating it for an integral audience.
Can you tell us more about some of the kind of games that you play?
Yeah, so authentic relating games have kind of gone around the world, and there's hundreds of people leading these in their living rooms and a lot online now. You can think of them as experiments, like, oh, let's just play an adult game, like the way that children would play circus. A group of children would get in the backyard and it's like, oh, let's play a game called circus. Like, you're the juggler and you're the clown and you're this and I'm the ringmaster. And like, you ever notice how kids do this? They literally create games and they assign roles to each other and stuff like that. So we're doing the adult version of that, which in a lot of ways, so the middle of the book is called Games to Grow Emotional Intelligence. That's chapters 5 through 8. The very first game is called the Noticing Game, which is literally like noticing what you noticed and noticing what's happening for you at the level of mind, at the level of emotions, at the level of sensations, energetics in the body, where your attention is drawn. Is it drawn to the other person? Is it drawn inward? Is there a balance of attention? So that's what the Noticing Game is. And it's really interesting that we use the word game, because it's not any different than Vipassana with your eyes open. And Vipassana in a conversation with someone. It's literally that kind of intersubjective meditation of we're both noticing what we notice and verbalizing it out loud together in relationship. The Noticing Game is kind of the foundation. In the book, I talk about a lot of other foundational games like the Curiosity Game and something we call Game Game. Game Game is literally setting the context for what you want to happen. It's almost like the land of make-believe. Like, any game that you want to play with this group of people in this time frame, what would it be? And so it's like this pure creativity exercise. We have a game called the Complain Game, which is actually more like using a complaint to then illuminate pattern in our psychology of how we disown our experience. And we have all these sentence stems. And so in the book, I talk about 12 core games because I was trying to carve out the center of the modality and the curriculum for us as a community. But there's actually hundreds of games. There's this amazing game called Conversation, which is like, instead of saying this thing that you would say in conversation, you say the motivation behind the thing that you would say in the conversation. And it's like this instant, like meta, like zoom out kind of experience.
I think I play some of these games in conversation anyway. Do you notice that these games are maybe common implicit games and you're making them more explicit, and let's play this game?
Yeah, they're specific structures.
I'm noticing that when I read your book and I think about the idea of authentic relating, it actually brings up a lot of issues in me. My dad is a con man, right? Like, cut him out of my life. I haven't spoken to him in over a decade. And I'm a teacher, philosopher, artist person, right? So I'm really interested in truth and meaning, right? And the kind of relationship between those two things. Even though I am not cool with my dad's way of manipulating meaning and stuff like that in a negative way, I guess I am very interested in being very careful about what you say and like the consequences of what you say. And so I'm noticing my mindset, and I'm noticing a lot of fear and anxiety around not carefully framing what I say at every moment, right? I've had long relationships. I was married for 10 years, and I know what it is to say something just off the cuff that like makes a big impact, that comes up over and over and potentially even causes some kind of an issue in the psyche of your partner, like around this topic or something like that. To me, I guess I, in general, worry a lot about how other people are going to hear things or take things. I mean, like, this is, I guess, like kind of a theme in our conversation is like, is it going to be okay? And so this is something I worry about. I'm noticing this, and it's like, well, I'm noticing you're an asshole. I hate you. Like, I could see it going that way. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Wow. I'm so delighted that you're revealing this. I'm like learning a lot more about you as we're getting deeper into this conversation. Really enjoying it as well. And so there's this aspect of your dad having this very unique archetype and carrying this very unique energy of someone who could be highly manipulative. And then you being really careful. And I imagine that's like served to create this superpower around discernment. You're able to peel things apart and discern truth from let's just call it doublespeak, right?
That's exactly it, man. And I get triggered by people too, who there's this guy, recently I did a debate with this guy, Matthew Siegel. I don't know if you know who he is, but he's an integral professor, and he uses language in ways that I feel is problematic and manipulative, especially when he's in this position of authority, especially an integral authority. I'm like quadruple triggered by this guy. Even in like regular conversations with people, I'll notice little manipulative things that I feel like you're framing things in a way that is not very honest or accurate, and that's a problem. So yeah, like it's a superpower, but it also comes with some potential issues. It's like when you have a trauma around a thing, you know, people go, oh, that's just your shadow. It's like, yeah, but people who have a shadow around something like that, like they're the first person to notice when there's a problem. Because, and so it doesn't mean that you're wrong. If anything, it means that you're hypersensitive to a particular thing.
It's easy for us to kind of write people off who are like highly sensitive and complaining about a particular thing, community, or, you know, it's like they'll be the first one to kind of point out the way that there is incongruent or something like that. And if they have low social power, you know, because they've been traumatized for most of their lives, kind of easy to be like, oh yeah, that person's a little reactive. But actually, they tend to be the canary in the coal mine, right? They tend to be the person who's like more highly impacted by subtle or small manipulations. And yeah.
That's how I find myself in this position a little bit, is that I'm really sensitive to these things. And so what I try to do, and what I'm going to try to do with this when I make a response to this other guy, is that I'm going to try to calmly and kindly explain these things and the problems that I see, and to use this conflict and hopefully to generate these upgrades. I'm trying to keep my shit together and to be very careful in the way that I express myself, do a good job, because I think that I could be very authentic and say exactly how I feel about this. And it's probably going to trigger and turn off a lot of other people who think that I'm just being mean, or like that I'm angry or something like this. You know what I mean? So I feel like I have to be very careful. And I guess in general, I feel like there should be a filter between my brain and my mouth. It's like one of the things that I've developed as a person who's trying to be a skillful practitioner in the world, is to not just immediately say whatever I think.
I love knowing this about you, that you are highly sensitive to these subtle manipulations, because it's actually something that I thought quite a bit about. So I have an upbringing of being in a born-again Christian cult, essentially.
Same.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So my uncle was a pastor, and the senior pastor who started the church and trained everyone, very dominant, charismatic person. And he convinced all of the adults of all of these things that were manipulative and abusive. And so I tend to be very, very sensitive to someone who's charismatic and getting the whole tribe to go in this direction. And I'm like, wait a second, that's towards a cliff. And that's one of the reasons why I talk about in the preface of the book, the lack of dogma within the authentically living movement. There are certain checks and balances, because it's a movement that's being led by 12 or 200 people, depending on how you count it, and not led by one person. I think there's a little more help than what I've seen in other niche communities. And that's what we need. We need like checks and balances to our power when we are influential over people, because there's nothing wrong with having influence.
Right.
You know, there's all these financial influence, there's intellectual influence, there's emotional influence, there's all these different types of power, and it's all inherently neutral, I believe. I mean, this is my Taoist perspective. It's inherently neutral, and the heart of the person who's wielding that power is primary factor, I believe, of whether or not there's harm or whether or not there's help happening.
To some extent, I think that's right. But I also think that, coming from a Christian perspective too, that there's a lot of people in these communities who are trying to do good, their heart's in the right place, but developmentally, they're not really mature or necessarily in line with reality as how it is. And so the road to hell is paved with good intentions in this regard. Yeah, so I worry. Another thing that I was thinking of around this idea of circling, and I drew this picture, right? I thought about, you have this like little shadow bit in the center, which is like this idea that you're guarding, and then you build up all of these walls around it, which are these like ideas, Christianity or something. There's like, well, I have faith, and like, well, atheists are childish, and you have all of these walls of justification built up around it. And then you might have a bunch of people circling that person, and we're all trying to get in at that shadow thing or whatever. This person over here sets off wall number 3. This person over here sets off wall number 2. And then hopefully you have somebody who's got the skeleton keys to get through these walls that can also help the person relate to these other people and deconstruct these walls. The practice of trying to get at that idea is to like either A, figure out a way to not set off any of their triggers or like step on any of their landmines, to either like navigate through to some kind of way where you don't trigger them, any of their defenses, or you start to deconstruct those walls and those defenses. What are the kind of tools that you have for being able to deconstruct these walls? Are you familiar with street epistemology?
I don't know that particular term. But
there's this guy who has this really amazing methodology where he sets a timer for 5 minutes.
You got 5 minutes for a quick interview?
Sure.
You do? All right, awesome. What's your first name?
James.
James? I'm Anthony. You mind if I record you?
No, that's cool, man.
Cool. All right. Are you you go to school here?
Yes, sir.
Cool. Are you heading to a class?
No, I gotta go get a Scantron. I gotta do a makeup test.
They still use those things? Okay.
I mean, my test ain't until 1:30. I got plenty of time.
Oh, you do? Yeah. All right. What are you studying here?
Sociology.
Okay.
That's my major, sociology.
Yeah.
Now I got all kind of classes.
Really?
Criminology. I just came out of word geography.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Cool. Well, what I'm doing, James, is I'm interviewing people to see how they arrived at their God belief, if they believe in a God. And if they do, I'd like to understand why and how do they get to that point.
Yeah.
Is there a particular God that you've chosen to worship?
I don't know what you call it, Jehovah. How do you call him? I don't know.
You're a Christian, I take it?
Yeah.
Okay. How committed are you to the belief being true? Like, if I were to have a scale where 100% is I'm 100% committed and convinced that the belief is true, and 0% is I have no commitment and I'm not convinced at all that the belief is true, where would you be?
I'm just say 100. I'm gonna say 100 because it's just, I don't know, my grandmother's real religious. Okay. You know, and I kind of grew up with my grandma, so.
You grew up with your grandma?
Just like the other day, somebody I put on Facebook, you know what I'm saying? It was like, no lie, man. It was like, how can Noah's Ark be real? What did
I'm gonna stand here to get that stupid train behind me.
What did the animals eat? You know what I'm saying? It was like, oh, I guess they had self-refilling. You know, just talking down. That don't really affect me. You know, I was raised with it, so I'm just going to stick with it.
You were raised with it. You know, my grandfather was raised in a time, you know, like with Alan Turing, and he was making the first computer, and back in the 40s, you know, during the war. And he was raised to think that smoking was actually good for him. They had commercials that would promote the benefits of it.
I not remember like I lived through it, but I've seen it. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, you see the old commercials. Like, he was taught that smoking was good for him. Does him being raised with a particular belief in mind make the belief true?
Yeah, in a way, it makes. Yeah, I mean, basically.
Okay.
It all depends. It depends, you know, because some people, you know, like they'll grow up and they'll change religion or change mentality. But if you're raised in it, it's more. I don't know. I can't think of the word. I guess more real to you, more logical to you.
Okay. So him being raised to believe that smoking was good for him makes it true that smoking was good for him?
That makes him believe. That makes him believe.
That's a distinction, okay.
That makes him believe that it is. It's not just because he was raised with it doesn't make, you know, smoking better, but it makes him think, like, why not? I can do it.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes him think that it really is good for me at all. But
how is this situation with my grandfather perhaps any different, James, than the situation with you being raised with your grandmother and being taught that this belief is true? How do you know that it's true? How could you be at 100% on the confidence, on your commitment to it?
No, man. I don't know. You know, and I know there's lots of religions. I done had people try to change me to different religions and stuff. There you go. I don't know. I guess kind of stuck in my ways. You know, I guess you can say that. Like, I believe what I believe. You know, and I don't know.
Okay.
I just really don't believe. I mean, I can't say I don't believe in other religions, because that's rude. You know what I'm saying? I respect everybody, and everybody has their own opinion. I just don't believe in none of them.
You don't believe those religions. You believe yours, and it's a large result of because you were raised that way. But you would acknowledge that just being raised in a particular way doesn't make the belief true.
That's true. That's true.
Okay, yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong. I don't want to misrepresent your position.
No,
if you acknowledge that that's the case and you don't know if the belief is true, is it an honest position to hold yourself at the 100% mark? Shouldn't you be moving down a tick or two?
That's true. I mean, it makes sense. It definitely makes sense. I don't know, man. I got friends that's atheists and stuff. You know, I just don't get down with it. I mean, that's true. I never thought about it like that. That's true.
James, I'd like to give you a card that I have. It has my email address, and my name is Anthony. And if you want to schedule a time to meet, or you just want to hit me up on email, and if you maybe thought of a different answer, or you want to talk about it some more, hit me. All right?
Email you, man.
Please do.
I'm going to email you probably when I get home.
Oh, yeah?
Probably when I get home. I got
Will you give our talk some thought?
Yeah.
Did you enjoy the talk?
Yeah, I really did. I really did make me think, you know? It made me think. It made me do a lot more thinking than I thought I was going to do today.
I can't ask for anything more, man. Thank you very much, dude. All right?
No problem. This is you right here?
That's me.
I'm
Anthony.
I promise you.
I really appreciate it, James.
Have a good one, man.
we're going to talk together about your belief. And really, I'm not going to get into apologetics or any of that stuff. I'm only going to ask you about epistemology. How do you know? Is that a good way to know? And it's all about just testing how you know. And so he starts by having you establish a scale of belief. How much do you believe in this thing? 100%, 99%. So then at the end, he has you say, okay, well, you say that you believe because you have faith, but this person over here believes because they have faith. I want to know what's actually true. Who could I believe? Is saying that you have faith actually a good reason to believe? So at the end, he has them test to see where they stand. So he has like this kind of particular methodology to get in there and examine your epistemology quickly. And he's able to actually make a really big impact really quickly in a way that's friendly and like leaves people being like, that was fun, like a fun game. So I'm wondering, do you have games that are able to help people deconstruct some of their walls? And what does that look like?
So one of the primary goals of circling, and circling is kind of an ironic practice because the idea is to be right here, right now with each other without trying to fix or change each other. So we let the past go for now. We let the future take care of itself. And we kind of come into a meditative, relational conversation. From there, we get curious, we explore. And it is actually this attitude of acceptance of like, oh, tell me more. Oh, you really hate yourself because of this thing? Wow, tell me about that. There's this fascination and radical curiosity, that thing that we do. At the end of the day, that's what we do during the practice period. We set a timer for 60 minutes. We're in the practice for that long. At the end of the day, the goal of the practice is to wake up to our relational blind spots. So in the book, I talk about this as hologram. We're able to see our seeing. We're able to see the way that we are lensing and making meaning of the world such that our relationships tend to play out a certain way. And if we can see our relational hologram or personal relational blind spots in the moment happening, we have more choice later on. In that sense, it's a developmental practice. The goal is not necessarily, I think people's ego defenses, that's what I would call that. If someone has a belief about something, let's say someone has a belief that, you should never have sex on the first date. That's a really bad thing to do. And they have a belief around that. And I try to say, like, how do you know that? If I try to deconstruct their knowing, which is really a mental game, it's like I'm deconstructing layers that actually make up their personality, but they might not be ready for that. So I think of the personality or the ego as psychological homeostasis, these things that kind of keep my ego within a comfortable zone.
It sounds like you were saying something like circling isn't like, okay, we got you surrounded now, buddy. It's not like, okay, now we're going to get that shadow out of you. I'm going to tell you everything that's wrong about you, and you're going to have to sit there and deal with it.
Yeah, it's not that. It's a very gentle personal growth method that's based on curiosity.
That makes a big difference.
Nice. Yeah. And I want to expand on this idea of defenses because we all have ego defenses. Sometimes we think of defensiveness as a derogatory term. Actually, it's so vital. So I think of ego defenses or personality, like you said, with that circle, there's all these layers, literally thousands of layers and thousands of ideas that form the structure of our mental, emotional self. And it's I think of it as psychological homeostasis. The homeostasis of you and I as warm-blooded mammals, our temperature pretty much always stays between 98 and 99 degrees. The optimal temperature of a human being is 98.6 Fahrenheit. And it almost always stays in that very, very small homeostasis. In biology, one of the ways that they define it is the capacity to resist change. So if I go in a cold plunge or I take a cold shower, my body kicks up some things to resist that. The same thing happens psychologically. If someone starts bringing ideas towards us, the closer they are to our identity, the more we get activated to actually resist those ideas and push them out, right?
Right.
Yep.
It depends on where we're at in our process and if it's going to lead to breakdown or breakthrough and what's going to actually work for that kind of stuff and whether we're ready and all this. Yeah. So and it makes sense that if you're not ready to change, that if you try to deconstruct something, that it's going to actually be really problematic and unhealthy if you're not ready or if you don't have something to replace it. So it would make sense that you would have healthy defenses that come up against some of that stuff. And honestly, unless someone is actually able to do the work, I think, to break down these walls and to show why they're wrong, you know what I mean? And to actually deal with those things, then you can't really even get to that core idea. The walls around it have to come down, and that's going to take time. Might take a long time.
Yeah, healthy change and healthy transformation is usually very slow and very incremental. And after someone is disturbed, or it's their psychological or emotional ideas about themselves or the way the world works, when that's disturbed or stirred up, we need to integrate. We need to reform our identity, so to speak. So actually disturbance from the outside, i.e. feedback or bumping up against someone in a conflict, right? There's disturbance from outside. We need time to integrate it. So one of my favorite quotes, do you know the poet David Whyte?
I don't.
Okay. So David Whyte is from Scotland and he has this amazing buttery voice with a Scottish accent. And he's an amazing poet. He has what I think is my all-time favorite YouTube video, and it's called The Conversational Nature of Reality.
Why are you unhappy? Because 98.98% of everything you do and all that you say is for yourself, and there isn't one. What does he mean by that? There's no self that will survive a real conversation. There's no self that will survive a real meeting with something other than itself. There's no organization that will keep its original identity if it's in the conversation. And after a while, you realize you don't want to actually keep that old static identity. You want to move the pivot of your presence from this thing you think is you into this meeting with the future, with the people you serve, with your family, with your loved ones. We shape ourselves to fit this world, and by the world are shaped again. The visible and the invisible working together in common cause to produce the miraculous. The miraculous. I'm thinking of the way the intangible air travelled at speed round a shaped wing easily holds our weight. So may we, in this life, trust to those elements we have yet to see or imagine. Trust to those elements we have yet to see or imagine, and find the true shape of our own selves by forming it well to the great intangibles about us.
Yeah, and he basically says life is a conversation. And my favorite quote, I think, ever, there's no fixed sense of self that can survive a real conversation.
Let's hear it again.
There's no fixed sense of self that can survive a real conversation. So that means if you and I are actually being real with each other, authentic, and we're actually in conversation, which means we're both expressing and we're both listening, we're going to be changed.
Yeah, I like that. And I think that's the good thing about what you're talking about too, is like, I think when you become a more mature person, you just start to kind of embody this idea that I'm comfortable with conflict. And even going into this conversation, I was like, I have my criticisms. I have things I want to ask him about. This is going to go fine though, because I know this guy is comfortable in conflict. And also I'm pretty practiced at navigating conflict. So I know that I can talk to him about these things in a way that's nice, that's not going to set off any of his things or make him feel threatened, that we'll just be able to have a good conversation around these things. I do feel engaging with these things has challenged me and made me see myself better and learn things about myself. Yeah. And hopefully some of my criticisms have helped you as well, What I was thinking about when I was reading some of this book, before I came across Integral, like I was one of these people who Wilbur talks about. I was writing a book. I knew that, right? I had a version of quadrants, which I called divisions of 4. And I was writing a book about these different stages and the lessons at each stage. I was sort of like a transpersonal type guru dude, but with more an integral focus, trying to teach people practical, rational things as well, not in a spiritually floaty woo kind of way. I remember I was so excited back before I came across Wilbur. I'm like, I have the complete philosophy. Who else has that? I found Wilbur and I was like, oh, okay, well, this is a little better than what I have. I need to go back and learn some of this stuff. But back in the day, when I was originally thinking about some of this, I was going to try to make like a contemporary mystery school for postmodern 20-something people who were having these existential awakenings and they don't have any kind of guidance or ability to navigate that kind of stuff. They're just sort of on their own and floating around and then having to make their way through the postmodern zeitgeist without necessarily any of the tools to navigate, right? So I was really concerned about this. And then when I got more into Integral and I started thinking about, more of the practical aspect of dealing with these kinds of people, I started realizing, okay, well, I'm just getting people after they've already gone through all these stages of development and they're already messed up, and I'm having to work with people who already have all these problems to begin with. It was kind of nice to think about the idea, okay, well, how do we then actually, maybe a more important project is to start to develop a new system that's going to make healthy people from the beginning and to like work people through stages of development instead of just having to put a Band-Aid on it on the back end and like try to work with something that's already messed up. Have you thought about this?
Yeah, I've had similar thoughts around what I call emotional education. I mean, I'm not the only person thinking about this. I mean, likely within 5 to 10 years, we're going to have emotional education in our actual school systems. It's just an idea that's kind of like, yeah, we need it.
Yeah, definitely.
It's so obvious. And so, right now I'm mainly training adults, mainly training people between the ages of 25 and 45, and in communication, in how to be a human, how to have emotions and how to express our truth and how to get our needs met and all of those things. But ultimately, my mission is to impact the educational institutions in our world that basically says, hey, we have this highly systematized curriculum that's actually been contributed to by at least 20 different teachers and leaders. And we've been running these experiments for 15 years. I think every time we do a circle or an authentic relating game night, it's like an experiment. And what we're seeing as teachers and leaders is people grow like crazy. People come into authentic relating games and they'll practice practice 1 hour a week and go to the local authentic relating games, and they'll do that for 3 months. And all of a sudden they know themselves better. They know how to communicate with the people in their lives. They're growing. They feel a sense of belonging and community. You know, people are healing from social anxiety in just a few short months from doing these kinds of practices, and better able to create the kinds of connections that they want in their lives. And I think the reason I titled the book Conflict Equals Energy is because that's the more advanced practice, essentially. Bringing a high degree of emotional intelligence and skill to these conflict and tension relationships, or conflict and tension in our relationships. It takes a lot of wherewithal. It takes a lot of presence and skill. But I think we can only start where we are as humanity. I think we need education. Just the idea that we continue to grow as emotional and relational beings after age 25. Supposedly, our brain development and our physical development kind of completes somewhere between age 22 and 25. We continue to grow for our whole lives. How do we educate ourselves? I think just that idea, it's in the self-help culture. It's thought of as pop psychology, but I think it's reaching the mainstream now. It's like, oh, we actually have to continue to grow and receive training in these kinds of things.
Yeah, it's almost like a type of emotional kung fu or something like that. You could see that this could become like and I think you kind of mentioned this in the beginning of the book, where you talk about how you used to get a lot of your good feelings and good vibes and community stuff from going to church and from being in church and stuff like that. And now you're getting a lot of those needs met in the context of these authentic relating groups, and where it's a time when we can come together, or we can work on ourselves, we can have this sense of community and be seen and be known. And you have these different roles that are potentially there, where you can step up and become a leader in this thing, or you can become the subject, I guess, of the relating and the circling. Yeah, I could definitely see it becoming a very important thing in a lot of people's lives, especially if it was made more common. I mean, especially in the very practical, get your personal needs met kind of way. I feel like it's pretty comparable to what it would be like to be at a religious gathering, but there's not really the same story and ethics and pedagogical, this is the ceremony you do when you're at this point in your life or something like that. I don't know if it really gets you in touch with ultimate mystery, but it definitely gets you in touch with your own mystery. And maybe in the same way that getting in touch with the ultimate mystery gets you in touch with your own mystery, maybe getting in touch with your own mystery also gets you in touch with the ultimate mystery. Have you found something about that? Is that the case, you think?
Oh, definitely. I think that's why I call it a secular awareness practice. It's kind of like curiosity. If curiosity was a religion, it would be authentic relating. And in the sense that there's no rules, there's no beliefs, there's very little ritual, just enough to be like, we do this thing at the beginning of a game night. Every time we come back from a break, we do a connect to self practice for 5 minutes, that kind of very small amount of ritual. Yeah, it provides community for people in a very secular format. What we're doing is not new. I often find the need to qualify what we're doing. Authentic relating has grown out of the human potential movement, which grew out of Gestalt psychology, right? So back in the 60s, there was Esalen. The Gestalt therapists were doing all these crazy experiments and processes with the pioneers of the human potential movement. And then in the 70s and 80s, it exploded into the point where it made the cover of Time magazine.
Wow.
Right? So the human potential movement in the mid 70s had this thing called encounter groups. And encounter groups were basically authenticity groups. It's like, take off your mask and start telling the truth. And there was 3,000 weekly groups happening in America in the mid 70s. Think about that. That's a lot.
Yeah, that's definitely a lot. Have you seen the Century of Self documentary series?
No.
Don't settle for anything less than you can be. Make your life a masterpiece.
This is a series about how Sigmund Freud's ideas about the unconscious mind have been used by those in power to control the masses in an age of democracy, and by Freud's nephew, Edward Bernays, who invented public relations. He brought Freud's theories into the heart of advertising and marketing. What they both believed was that underneath all human beings was a hidden, irrational self, which needed to be controlled, both for the good of individuals and the stability of society. But the Freuds were about to be toppled from power by opponents who said they were wrong about human nature. The inner self did not need to be repressed and controlled. It should be encouraged to express itself. Out of this would come a new type of strong human being and a better society. But what in fact emerged from this revolution was the very opposite. An isolated, vulnerable, and above all greedy self, far more open to manipulation by both business and politics than anything that had gone before. Those in power would now control the self, not by repressing it, but by feeding its infinite desires.
Adam Curtis. He mostly does political stuff. That one in particular was about the development of a self and psychology and capitalism and how all these things came together. And the human potential movement is like one of the things that it talks about. It seems like these practices are kind of similar to Big Mind too, in how they are almost meditative and kind of about reorienting the self to different aspects to itself, but in this kind of invite the ego to come and participate in the process kind of a way.
I am not going to fight with your egos because I'll lose. I know that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hire or enlist your egos to work for me. I'm going to ask, and I'm going to use the magic word, which us as Westerners have all been taught by our mommies, opens all the doors, and I'm going to use the magic word, please. So we will dissect the self in order to study the self, in order to transcend the self. In order to look at certain aspects of the self, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give them labels, artificial labels, names, that I have found work. And I will ask you if I may speak to that voice, okay? Now this comes from a technique called voice dialogue. What I'd like you to do is shift your position in the chair to where that voice is seated. Now that voice is seated wherever you shift to. And then I will ask questions that allow you to gain insight into your new perspective. So the first voice that I'd like to speak to, I just want to speak to the voice of the protector. All right, I am speaking to whom?
So it seems in that regard a very good marriage between psychology and meditation in that same sort of a synthesis. Yeah?
Yeah. I was a part of the Integral Institute when Genpo Roshi was teaching Big Mind, and Diane was there doing that practice with a lot of the courses that we were putting on. And it produces such a palpable state shift. I mean, I'm a very radical person, and it's still what I would call old paradigm. And by old paradigm, I mean, you have one teacher and 50 students sat in rows looking at the teacher, and the teacher's telling, let me speak to the voice of open, clear mind.
So you're saying this is different in that it's more like a game. So there's less like a person who's running it, and it's more like we're all playing together, or we're teaming up and playing in pairs or something like that, right?
Yeah, it's much more like experiential learning. So experiential learning, me as the facilitator, I'll teach for 5 minutes and then I'll put people into an exercise and then I'll ask people what their experiences are. And so in any given hour of a course that I'm leading, I'm teaching somewhere between 5 and 12 minutes of that hour. It's mostly them having the experience and charting their own way and listening to the insights of their peers and like chewing on this together. It's much more about inquiry. And I think one of the reasons that is necessary is because the millennials don't give a shit. I mean, you're probably like an older millennial. I'm solidly Gen X. Millennials, they don't care about who has 30 years of experience and who is the teacher.
I guess if I'm putting myself in these camps, I'm 38, so.
Young Gen X then.
Yeah, okay, something like that. But yeah, we've seen from experience that there are a lot of adult professionals who have years and years of experience who are not the smartest or best experts on any of these topics. And they would point to those things like, well, I'm older. It's like, well, I have experience. It's like, yeah, but I'm not impressed. So
yes, the nature of authority and experience is literally transforming. I think the millennial generation is kind of aged 25 to 36 right now.
So what is these new young kids? What are they called?
There's a couple, like there's
like the Zoomers or something?
Generation Z or something. Yeah. A lot of what authentic relating is doing is taking practices from the world's great religions and the world's great contemplative traditions like Vipassana and taking out not only the religious context, but also taking out the spiritual context. You literally don't have to have any metaphysical beliefs. Why is someone meditating, to get to enlightenment? Or are they doing it to reduce stress? There's all these things around the concept of mindfulness. Well, authentic relating is just like, okay, all of that is really cool, but how is it for us to be in relationship with each other right now? And so it's speaking to much more of our needs for belonging, our needs for connection, which is different than our need for autonomy and accomplishment and things like that. It's just looking at a very particular dimension of the human experience, which is the lower left. It's like our need for connection for its own sake, not as any means to an end, but because we're social creatures.
Right. And looking in the lower left, ultimately figure out what's going on with us in our upper left, right?
I would say it's actually lower left dominant.
Really? Okay.
Mm-hmm. Because I'm an integralist, I have to put all of it, like connection to self yourself and owning your experience, like I emphasize those things.
Maybe that's just because I mostly read the first couple chapters, which are probably more about those kinds of things. So yeah, probably as you get deeper into the book, it gets more into the relating stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm just not there yet. I'll get there.
Cool.
You mentioned the 5 practices of authentic relating. Can you sum them up for us real quick?
Yeah, so it's welcome everything, assume nothing, reveal your experience, own your experience, honor self and others. So these are, first of all, practices. They're things that, in a sense, can be impossible. Assume nothing is impossible. Like our brains are actually designed to create expectations.
How do you do that?
Exactly. But it actually points to a state of mind where that's complete openness.
Where your assumptions become clear to you. Well, that's an assumption. And I'm not supposed to be over here making assumptions, so I need to be more careful.
Yeah, checking our assumptions and waking up to our assumptions is a way we can practice assume nothing. And welcome everything is just that. Whatever is happening in your life, turn towards it.
Yeah.
And revealing ourselves is the way we feel connected. And I think of the word reveal as like we reveal our experience first to ourselves. We're excavating the layers of self and making the unconscious conscious. And then we're revealing it to the other person so we can be known. And owning your experience is about self-responsibility and about, the way I say it is like being the emotional maturity you want to see in the world.
I like that.
Yeah. Honor self and other is just kind of this koan of like, how do I honor myself and other with any individual decision make? It's kind of this axiom or thing that, can I quite do that? Definitely not all the time. And it puts you in that polarity of honoring yourself and honoring other. And how do you do both?
Yeah, I know a lot of people take issue with the guy, but I actually found integral through Andrew Cohen. And I really like his philosophy. I'm not Buddhist or anything, like I don't believe in the metaphysical claims or anything like that, but he had this idea, he would talk about creative friction. And he used to say part of his idea of the spiritual practice is face everything and avoid nothing. And I really like that. I think that that's beautiful. In terms of his personal application, I feel like out of all the criticisms I've seen and all the gurus who I've seen be criticized, I feel like he actually seemed like he handled it with some of the most integrity in terms of taking a sabbatical, taking time to look at himself and coming back and owning his shit. Honestly, I hope that there's potentially a path to redemption for him and for other people. And I think there's so much cancel culture stuff that's going on. I feel like maybe part of the way that we can honor other people is to figure that out. Like, what's the road to redemption when you do mess up or we do say that there's a problem? It matters how you deal with it. It matters if you're in denial and screw you, I do what I want, or if you're actually going to listen and try to do something about it.
I think this is so important because I believe evolution is speeding up in some way. And there's so many people who are mired in privilege and their view of the world is actually shaped by socioeconomic realities. And if you look at the Black Lives Matter movement, its origins, if you look at it 8 years ago, was quite distorted. They were taking these narratives and really distorting them and really politicizing things and really creating a black versus white militant almost activist. But I think the movement itself is actually much more mature now. And just the fact that there was one point where 9 of the top 10 selling books on Amazon were about white privilege and systemic racism and all of these things. And the challenge with it is if we're just canceling and making everybody wrong, we can't make traditional things should stay the way they are, like traditional belief system. We can't just tear it down. It's like the fabric of our society. We have to give it a chance to actually open and have some redemption and be like, oh, we were thinking about these things wrong, but actually things need to stay, it's like we need to make sure we have food distribution, right?
Yeah. When China had their big revolution and they switched from one system to another, lots of people died just from an inability to move resources around fast enough skillfully because they didn't have any of the infrastructure in place yet. You can't just switch from one thing to another. It's not going to work. So yeah, it takes time. It has to be built and you have to, like you're saying, to some extent, you transcend and include the good stuff of the past and make sure that we're honoring those things because if not, it's going to come back to bite us. So let's see, I have another question about your hologram. And let's see, you talk about the concept of the hologram and how each one has their own hologram. What does this mean practically? And how can we expand the horizons of our personal holograms? And what will happen if we do?
So you've heard of this phrase, how you do one thing is how you do everything?
No, I haven't.
No.
Tell me more about that.
It's kind of like a pop psychology idea. It's like, how we do, one relationship is likely how we do every relationship. In other words, we have like a core hologram or a core fractal that's actually goes into every aspect of our lives. So the idea of the personal hologram is waking up to the way that we're creating our own reality. I don't like that phrase, that's for sure. But we're creating the relational... Yeah, exactly.
Just kidding.
Well, I think it's pretty true. I think it's true 90% of the time.
Sure, no, yeah, we do live in our own subjective perspective, right? That's absolutely the case.
Well, primarily in our relationships, it's true.
Mhm.
Where it's like, I call it Jasoning the world. Like, I'm going around and I'm looking at the world through this Jason lens.
You would call it that.
So our personal hologram, or having a hologram moment, is just that waking up to the actual pattern that's happening right now, and the actual pattern that's been creating some of the dynamics that I have, let's say in romantic relationship or in friendship. And through circling or an authentic relating exercise, it just creates the conditions under which this awakening process becomes more likely and a little bit more practical, because we're waking up to like one particular part of the fractal. It's like, oh, I do that. Oh, I do that. Wow, I can see that I'm doing that right now. And then the result can be choice. So
yeah, very similar to the way that, like I was talking before about how I notice my own tendency to be really concerned about how things are going to affect people. I know that's something that I'm really sensitive to. In a sense, I need to kind of like both own that and also learn to potentially maybe bracket that and be able to, I guess that's what you're saying, is that we become more and more aware of the ways that we tend to interpret the world from our own limited perspective or in our own type or in our own style or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I guess over time we can learn to potentially try other things, right? It's like you recognize that this is a pattern. Okay, well, what would it be like if I tried a different pattern? Yeah, something like that.
It's behavioral flexibility. So sometimes I like to say that authentic relating is not about healing primarily. It's actually just about putting new options on the menu. So often when we're triggered or in our relationships, the stakes are really high. We only have one option. We only have the way that we do it, right? When someone is really needy with me, I just retreat and shut down. And then I go back to the relationship 2 or 3 days later. I train that person to not need me so much because it's so uncomfortable. If you're doing that avoidant pattern and you notice it, then we can actually put more options on the menu of like, oh, maybe this time I just request space. Can we talk in a couple of days? Like I can be a little more relational about how I'm creating the distance that's comfortable for me. And
then I think this is a lot of it, right?
Yeah.
It's just noticing patterns and then trying to figure out a new potential pattern. Like you're saying, putting new things on the menu. That's kind of what I was saying too before about the more philosophical or psychological approach, is that I try to figure out what a person's stories are and then try to give them more options in terms of different stories that might serve them better. So, I mean, it sounds like very similar to what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
What do you think about the idea that this is one important ingredient, right, in part of actually a bigger holistic practice? Earlier, we were talking about integral governance methods and how they are also built on processing tensions and having this healthy relationship. And basically, you know, I've been trained in some of those things. I haven't done the circling, but the version that I've been trained in is called collab, which is sort of like a variation on holacracy. I think it's got different types of rounds for different types of problems. That's one of the major differences. But basically, it's very similar to like a kind of game where the rounds of the game are determined by what we're trying to achieve in processing this tension. And on the other side of it, there is an output. Have you ever done any integral governance stuff like this?
Just a little bit. So the Integral Center was running with holacracy. I guess I was actually part of that for about 2 years. So with Michael Porcelli and Robert McNaughton, I was kind of the third major stakeholder in that project because I was working full time for them for the last couple of years. And we ran with holacracy, fully set up with the Glass Frog interface and everything. And we would process tensions. And toward the end, there was like 8 people in that company involved in it. Like other course leaders were a part of it. And I've known Brian Robertson for many years. He came to the Integral Institute 15, 16 years ago and did a few sessions with us back when holacracy was very, very new. So your question was, is this one piece of a much larger practice?
Or a more like holistic approach to being a practical human, right? Because it seems this approach can be good for me and my relationships as a part of me being able to figure out how to communicate and own my own shit. I guess I'm saying the good thing about this integral governance practice is that we can play a type of game where on the other side of it, we can come to a conclusion. And I haven't gotten all the way into the book yet, but I don't know if you have a practice like that.
Yeah, I think that would be the realm of, coaching or personal development or career development. We can have specific goals and then move towards them. And generally when we set up this idea of, I want to accomplish X, Y, and Z, our personal challenges and patterns that are preventing us from already having that get kicked up in the process, and then we can work on them. So absolutely, this focuses on the lower left quadrant. This focuses on our relationships. It focuses on our communication. It's a particular tool or a very large set of tools. Like actually in the book, I put 30 tools in the book. That was really fun to put it into these really bite-sized pieces. One of them is called Psychological Safety Net. And I talk about making psychological safety statements, which is just a way to build rapport and safety into our connections so that we can have more secure attachments, so that we can actually take a risk and tell the truth. Some of the tools are very specific for when we use them. But the thing is, communication and relationships, in a sense, is the fabric of life. So I love that we're having like this very in-depth dialogue. You're asking all of these kind of probing questions because what we talk about is the relational dimension of life. In other words, there's the intellectual dimension of life, and I can have, a conversation with someone and we're like talking about things and ideas, and some people get really turned on by ideas, right? And then there's like the health dimension of life that involves our exercise and our food. And then there's the career or purpose dimension of life, right? And so the relational dimension is something that if our communication improves, the thesis is kind of like, if I actually wake up to how I'm affecting the people around me and they're beginning to share this impact with me. And so there's like this more complex feedback loop going on in my relationships. I will begin to grow or continue to grow as a social creature and emotional creature, and my communication will improve. And therefore the rest of my life improves by proximity to how important.
Well, it seems like no matter what you do, this aspect is going to be in play. And so even if you're trying to do some governance problem solving, or you're involved in a religion, or you're trying to accomplish things in the world or whatever it is, there's always going to be this social dimension. You're always going to have to basically be navigating conflict and tension in your life. And so this is always a factor at play. And having these skills and these tools in your toolbox is definitely going to help you be able to deal with these situations, whatever they may be. And I mean, sure, you might still need to study business, and you still might need to do kung fu or whatever it is that you do, or exercise or whatever. So it's not everything, but it to extent plays a part in every part of our life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, indeed. It's cool that you're mentioning kung fu. One of the chapters is called emotional aikido, and I use that as a metaphor
to like take someone's energy and work with it and kind of use it back. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, emotional aikido is basically receptivity first, or listening first. So if someone is upset or angry or just a little hangry and cranky and frustrated, and they're like taking that out on you and not owning their experience, instead of like trying to coach them to own their experience or trying to, get them to be a better human in that moment, it's the idea of like, oh, let me be receptive. Tell me more. Like, oh, I want you to feel heard. There's a 5-step process. It works for full-blown conflict. Actually, the first step is called do nothing, which is
step 1, do nothing. I love that. That's a step I can get behind.
Yeah, because if we can successfully breathe and ground and slow the conversation down in the first 30 seconds or even 3 minutes, then we set ourselves up to have a successful outcome in that conversation, or a collaborative outcome where we're actually listening to each other. But if we follow our own reactivity in the first 30 seconds, all bets are off. Then you have two people who are both triggered communicating with each other. So emotional Aikido, Aikido as a practice, sometimes we think of it as, moving out of the way and then redirecting the person's energy back at them or something like that. An actual Aikido master would be like, no, that's not what it is. Aikido is the transformation of conflict into love. If force is needed, let's actually de-escalate the conflict in the most skillful way that causes the least amount of harm to both people.
Excellent. Yeah, that does make sense.
Whereas karate
de-escalate.
is like, force with force.
Force with force, yeah.
Aikido is like meeting force with receptivity.
I like that. I used to be on the worship team in church, and one of the things that I noticed was that there were people who would come every week, and they almost seemed like it was like a drug for them, and they were like a suffering monger, and they would come and cry. This is like their medicine. Do you have people who come to these circling things or these authentic relating things, and maybe they're seeking healing, but is there a point at which it becomes like, okay, I feel like psychology has its issues and meditation has its issues, right? Meditation can tend to be all about bypassing, right? Mm-hmm. Just witness it. It's fine. The psychology can be kind of become like indulgent in digging around in your own shit. Oh yeah. Like I'm just going to wallow in it. I wonder if you run into any of these kinds of problems and what you do about it.
Yeah. Because I've been in this community for 8 years, leading for the last 6 years, I have seen a lot of dysfunction inside the community and attempted to formulate the practice, both in my workshops and in the book, in a way that mitigates those challenges. And one of them is what you're talking about, the connection junkie. It's like they're so interested in deep eye contact and going as deep as possible and being really intimate with other people. And like they end up in codependent relationships because they're just like, let's just merge, let's just be in, and it's a very intoxicating thing to merge your consciousness with another human being in emotional intimacy, whether or not there's physical intimacy happening. I know that for me personally, for a long time, I would create these very emotionally intimate relationships with women. And sometimes I was attracted to them at one level or not, but it was getting a certain need met. And then over time, I realized it's like, oh, I'm actually kind of using this as a drug. It's like I'm going as deep as possible as I can in emotional intimacy with as many people as I can. I'm just emphasizing that dimension of life so much. And so that's one error mode, is the connection junkie. Another would be the vulnerability Olympics, because it's really juicy and alive when someone opens up their pain, or when someone opens up, when we see someone being courageous and vulnerable at the same time. Oh my gosh, everybody in the room is just on the edge of their seat. It's so compelling, right? And so then people in the community start to go there because they're getting social points for going there. And there's a lot of times where vulnerability is not called for. Actually, having emotional boundaries is a much better choice.
Yeah.
Because if we're not self-defined and we don't have the capacity to be self-defined, how can we be clear enough to bring our full self to a relationship? So learning both sides of that, the ability to be vulnerable and the ability to have boundaries and privacy.
Totally. I think about this a lot because as a person who is interested in philosophy and talking to people and stuff, one of the things that I've noticed is you'll get to know a person and you've talked to them for an hour and then they've told you their whole life story and all this kind of stuff. And you're like, well, that's great. You don't know anything about me, but I feel like I know everything about you. Yeah. And also because my dad is a con man type dude, to me, almost any amount of talking about yourself, I almost have a reaction against it where I feel like it's manipulative, right? Like it's all personal propaganda. Like you're trying to make people think a way about you. And so I'm triggered by this. I actually have to go out of my way to practice telling people of things about myself. And I will usually only do it if it's relevant to the conversation. Like today, I have been what I would consider to be very open and vulnerable with you. And I've told you a lot about myself, more than I probably normally would. But I wanted you to understand where I was coming from with this. And if I had criticism, why I was having them and where they were coming from. And also, I think just the context and the framework, like sort of open up, be real, be honest with where some of this stuff is coming from. Yeah, not just stuff on the surface, but like say why these things matter. So I've, been trying to do that, but definitely in general, I feel like I'm a much more guarded person. And I feel like you have to be really careful. I don't know, I guess I'm just like in general, really careful with my communication with people and also careful in trying to manipulate people's ideas of me and things like that. I'm triggered by a lot of language and communication because it feels often very manipulative. Like you're saying, people are trying to shape your perception of them. I could totally see that being a thing, saying this vulnerability Olympics, and like trying to get attention and stuff like that. Like I could see that a big turnoff for me.
Yeah, I think the circling community is one of the reasons I've kind of moved away from circling. I no longer teach it and more towards authentic relating is because I think it like clarifies if we're trying to improve our communication because we want to be better citizens and have better relationships with everyone from our intimate partners to our friends to our colleagues. There's something about that end goal that clarifies the practice and the intent. Whereas if our end goal is to just explore what's happening right here, right now, or explore what's in here, I think there's actually more pitfalls. And so that's why I've and circling itself tends to attract personal growth junkies, people who are just take every workshop. And because it is so deep and it can be so profound, people who have already done these things, like lots of meditation or lots of yoga or lots of tantra, they're the people who are attracted to circling. Yeah. Whereas authentic relating, and especially the way that my company is doing it, it really is trying to be a bridge from this personal growth culture to the rest of the mainstream. I think this is so cool. Like I haven't actually done this kind of extended dialogue because, I've been doing lots of podcasts, but very often you want to fit it into like a 30 or 45-minute container. And I'm really enjoying this a lot. Yeah.
Excellent, man. I'm enjoying it a lot too. I really like being able to connect with you and really enjoyed being able to discuss some of this stuff. And I really appreciate you dealing with my concerns and my criticisms with such grace. In my group, I originally started it, it's the I Am David Long Friends and Fans group. So I originally started it as a place to share my work and to be able to find people who connected around it and to be able to talk about it and try to start discussions around this stuff. A pretty good community has built up around me and I've been doing lots of things to foster real connections between people. I welcome everybody who joins my group into the group and I encourage them to introduce themselves with a video introduction and to tell us about themselves and their hobbies and where they're from and how they came to the group and stuff like this. And we've been even having bi-weekly community meetings where the group picks a topic and then we all get on Zoom together, whoever wants to come, and we talk about the topic and we go through different rounds together. So I've been doing lots of work to build community. And I've told people in the group, I consider myself a leader. I don't consider myself the leader. I like the idea of having a wolf pack of a bunch of strong, mature leaders in my group. And I like the idea also of having this space where you can invite people into it. And even if I don't answer the question, there's a bunch of really smart people in my group who can discuss with you and answer your questions and talk to you about integral and all this kind of stuff. But one of the things that came up in one of our meetings was, we've been talking about starting like a meditation group, and one of our members who does guided meditation stepped up and started doing a weekly meditation group, and someone suggested some kind of circling or authentic relating practice. And you're in the group, so I thought I would potentially ask if you would mind maybe hosting or leading some kind of something in my group with the people, or maybe teaching us a couple games that we could potentially continue to play, even if you're not around to always do them or something like this, if you'd be down for something like this.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm in a different phase of life because I released this book 2 months ago. And for the last 6 years, I've been leading these weekend workshops, 3-day workshops or 2-day workshop. And now I'm going around to many different communities and I'm introducing people to authentic relating. So I did a community session for the Rebel Wisdom community, and I did a session with San Diego Integral. And San Diego Integral, they started as a meetup group that were talking intellectually about the theory, but they've actually been running for 11 years. And so there's like a real community that's formed around this. And I did a whole session introducing them to the authentic relating practice. So yeah, I would love to. It would be very different than this dialogue. It would be like pure facilitation.
Sure.
You'd be teaching about 5% of the time and mostly exercises and getting the group sharing and interactive and all of that. Yeah.
That'd be great, man. I would really love that. And I know there's a lot of people in the group who would really love it too. Yeah. And if you could maybe just teach us a couple of games, then even if you can't always do it, then maybe we could still play the games without you or something. I mean, we would always want to involve you in anything you want to be involved in, but I know you're a busy guy. So
yeah, these are community technologies. There's social technologies that are relatively simple, many of them, and quite profound. And so they're not that hard to lead. There are some that are much more complex. It takes a really skilled facilitator to lead, but many of them are just very simple. So
are there any ones that are so simple that you could suggest or that we could play quickly?
Like you and I?
Yeah. A person who's watching could maybe do with someone at home is like a simple one.
So how about we do this? We just do a sentence stem. And a sentence stem is just, you start with these words and then you see what tumbles out of your mouth. And one of the most potent sentence stems in authentic relating is what I really get about you. And the nature of this is the unique flavor that this person brings into community and the unique, like the values that you see this person standing for. If you reflect that back to them, just starting with this phrase, what I really get about you. So do you want to go first or do you want me to go first?
I'll go first.
Okay.
What I really get about you is that you love people and you care a lot about trying to make people healthy and happy.
Wow. That's really awesome to hear. Because after like a 2-hour recorded dialogue, if that's like the thing that you get about me, like I just feel so touched and seen.
Respect, brother. I do highly value this about you.
Yeah, thank you. Wow. What I really get about you is this ability to it's like this fractal mind thing you have. It's almost like the background behind you is representative of like you serving the world with your discernment, and it's discernment and care together. And I also really get that, especially with what you said about the community. You want other people to be empowered. I imagine that there's this kind of going back and forth. It's like you wield skepticism with such unapologetic care.
Man, I feel very seen on the other side of that. Yeah, I think that's what it is. Respect, brother. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, this has been awesome, man. What a great time.
Yeah, for sure. Let's do this again. So is your next book going to be about how to do this with kids? With younger people, how to potentially bring this stuff into the education system?
Well, I don't know what the next book is going to be about. I have a couple ideas. I'm still in the process of, it's too soon.
Fair enough.
Put it that way.
Isn't that how it is? You just finished your book. It's like, well, what's the next book? You know how long it took me to finish this book? What do you mean, what's the next book? Why don't you finish reading this book first?
It was such an intellectual slog. I don't even know how to share it. You go through all of the stages, the writer's block, getting so into one chapter and like editing that one chapter like 2 hours straight. And then you can't see the forest for the trees. And you're like, wait, is there even coherence between what I'm talking about in this part of the book? And then you start switching things around. And it was really, like I said in the beginning, really fun, fulfilling, and grueling at the same time.
Yeah.
It really works your mind. Have you been an author? Have you published before?
I'm hoping to have my book finished by the end of the year. It's called Longview. It's about stages of an unfolding integral revolutionary movement. So it's like a lot of Zeitgeist and Peter Joseph and stuff. He's really good at talking about the problems with the current system and the kind of system that we would want to move to. He's got no plan as to how to transition from one to the other. So that's kind of what I'm trying to bring to the table is stages of an unfolding movement and the values and virtues at each stage and the potential pitfalls at each stage. And what I've noticed is a lot of people talk about the revolution or the goal of the revolution. Like this is what it is, as if the one thing that they are interested in or want to work on is the whole thing. And it's like, well, that could be a part of it, but that's not all of it, kind of a thing. So my hope is that in being able to frame it this way, that people will be able to have a better conversation about how we can work together to accomplish something so big and also let people have their areas of expertise, kind of a thing. So it's more like Thank you, man. It's a nice way of introducing my name into the conversation.
Oh, that's right. I didn't even notice that. The long view.
Yeah.
That's great.
Respect, man. It has been a true honor and blessing to be able to spend this time with you today.
Likewise, man. Thank you so much. And I was not expecting this. I haven't done a 2.5-hour dialogue before. That's so fun. And I look forward to a lot more intellectual connection and other types of connection in the future. It feels like I have a new friend and a new colleague. And yeah, thank you so much.
Likewise, brother. Yeah, same. I'm also going to do a good job of editing this video. It'd probably take me a minute to put it out, but I'll cut out all the gaps and ums and likes and you knows. And by the time I edit it down, it'll be under 2 hours. So it'll be like a watchable thing.
Nice. Very cool.
I mean, you're a very well-spoken person anyway, so I doubt I'll have to do much to, your audio to make it very, very nice. But I am a very stuttery,
I do my own editing too.
Right. You know all about that then.
Yeah, because I'm a video editor. That was my career for 10 years. And so I'm literally starting to record the audiobook and I'm like, oh, wow, I'm actually going to edit the whole audio track in Final Cut Pro because that's the way I know how to do it fast. And then I'm going to send it to someone to master.
So, buddy, where can people get your book?
Yeah, authenticrelating.co/book. So my company is Art International, Authentic Relating Training. And we have this 6-week online course called The Art of Being Human. We also do in-person courses actually all over the world. We have course leaders working in Bali and several in Europe and here in the US. So that's authenticrelating.co. It's my website, and authenticrelating.co/book is where you can get the book. So, and it's on Kindle and paperback. And we also have a version for tablet on the website.
And if you're watching this later on YouTube, there's a link in the description. Thanks to everybody for hanging out. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Join the I Am David Long Friends and Fans group. If you haven't yet, make sure you support me on Patreon. Big thanks to my current Patreon supporters. Have a wonderful evening wherever you may be, or whether it is evening or not, whatever. Take it easy. Have a great one. Peace.